Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
Antonio Pierce was the man for one season. What is the Raiders' new direction after letting him go? Also, the Bears want what their hated rivals had, and the Titans may be the biggest mess in the NFL. Today's episode brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time.
I'm Peter Bukowski, starting your day with the can't-miss stories and biggest debates in sports. You're Locked On Sports Today.
Searching all major sports. Found.
Let's start with the biggest story.
Antonio Pierce got the Las Vegas Raiders job thanks in part to superstar players like Max Crosby and Davante Adams essentially saying, you better hire this guy. And now, after just a season fully with that title, Antonio Pierce is out in Vegas. Our boy Q, never out, from Locked On Raiders. He's with us. And Q, there is the specter of Tom Brady hanging over all this. We'll get to the next steps here. But why? How did this happen that this all fell apart this quickly?
It just felt like it never was right from the beginning, right? I mean, it just felt like even going back to training camp in Costa Mesa, having a quarterback competition between Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell, ultimately naming Gardner Minshew the quarterback and starting QB. And a lot of people, including myself, thought Aiden O'Connell should be the guy, gets off to a bad start. Bring in Aiden O'Connell. He gets injured, goes back to Minshew. Obviously not a lot of winning along the way. Go on a 10-game losing streak. Called out his players for making business decisions. Bad in-game decisions. When to call a timeout, when not to call a timeout, when to challenge, when not to challenge. There was a lot that went into it that just showed the inexperience that Antonio Pierce had as a head football coach. And I've always believed that you don't hire the interim to be the head coach. But I'll tell you, Peter, I was fully on board with Antonio Pierce getting the job because of what he was able to do in 2023, similar to Max Crosby, similar to Davante Adams, similar to Josh Jacobs, and everybody else that was in that Raiders locker room. They all wanted to see Antonio Pierce return. So the Raiders made the decision to bring him back, gave him the keys to the car, and, well, he wasn't able to drive it the correct way, and he wasn't able to lead it to success in 2024. So they ultimately made the decision to move on, and it seems like another rebuild is on the way with the Raiders.
Do you think this is a failure of patience? Because all the things you're describing sounds like a coach who is inexperienced, and that's what he is. I mean, we're not that far removed from Antonio Pierce playing in the NFL. He does not have a ton of experience as a coach. So if you believed in his fit with the culture and the players believed in him, why not just be patient? Or did the other parts, the culture part and the player relationship part, deteriorate to the point where you can go, okay, we don't need to be patient with this guy?
No, I don't think so. I think the culture part is still in place, right? Being in the locker room following Week 18, the loss to the Chargers, every player that was in that locker room said how proud of Antonio Pierce they were. He kept the team together during the 10-game losing streak, kept them fighting, scratching, clawing, and I know that the results weren't there, but every player to a T said that they appreciated what Antonio Pierce was able to do for them. Ultimately, if you look at the AFC West, man, you've got three head coaches that are going to be in the Hall of Fame, and Andy Reid, Sean Payton, and Jim Harbaugh. And then you got Antonio Pierce. So if you're trying to keep up with the Joneses, and I think this ultimately came down to the decision and the bringing on of Tom Brady as well, that how do you win? How do you win now? I mean, Peter, they've had 2 times that they've made the playoffs since the last time they were in the Super Bowl, right? I mean, they've had 7 coaches in 13 years. I mean, there's been just a carousel of coaches, coordinators, QBs. I mean, it's just been one big try to throw the dart at the dartboard and hope that it hits bullseye. And so many times they've missed.
It started off, I think, as speculation, then maybe informed speculation. Now it seems like Tom Brady is going to have a meaningful role in deciding who's going to be the next head coach for the Las Vegas Raiders. How does that guide who you think, if you're going to handicap this race, are the likely candidates here moving forward?
I mean, I just look at the easy name to throw out there is Mike Vrabel. He's attached to every single head coaching job that's open right now, and then some, right? If there's any more that happens
for his agent.
Right, exactly. His agent's fantastic. But no, I mean, Vrabel and Brady obviously have the ties together, played together there in New England, and they remain really tight buddies. New England, you see what they did with Gerard Mayo. I think they realized that, and they're putting the full court press on to try to get him fired, or get him hired, I should say, probably by like Thursday afternoon. Like, they want to get that thing wrapped up as soon as possible to not even allow the Raiders to get a chance. But there's some other names out there. Pete Carroll is a guy that I've been hearing is a guy that enjoys rebuilding and is a guy that could be interested, wants to get back into coaching. There's a couple other names out there. I've heard John Gruden's name floated out there locally multiple times, not by me, but by others, that he could be a dark horse. And we know how much Mark Davis loves John Gruden. And I'm not a big fan of going back to your ex. I'm sure not a big fan of going back to your ex twice, but maybe that's what the Raiders decide to do. That could be a possibility. A name that was floated out to me today that I thought was pretty interesting was Bruce Arians. And I don't know if there's any interest on Bruce Arians' part. I don't know if the Raiders have any interest in Bruce Arians. But all I do know is that everywhere he's been, he's done well with the quarterback, whether that was Pittsburgh with Big Ben, Indianapolis when he took over there, right, and when he had to step into that role, Arizona with Carson Palmer, obviously in Tampa Bay winning a Super Bowl with Tom Brady. So I'll throw that out there. And then one more, maybe Mike McCarthy if he gets out of Dallas. His agent is Don Yee. Don Yee, who else does Don Yee represent? Tom Brady. So, I mean, ultimately, Brady has ties to everybody. So, I mean, there's not somebody out there in the league that Brady doesn't know, has played with, or wants to work with, right? I mean, there's all these people are interested in Tom Brady. But the thing is, he's a Fox broadcaster, and they're broadcasting a Super Bowl. So he's not really available to do a lot of ownership type things until after February 9th. So how does that slow down this process? That's my other question.
You can stay up to date on the Las Vegas Raiders by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Raiders on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. You're Locked On Sports Today. Coming up, the Bears head coaching search. They're casting a wide net. Before we get to that, Zion is back. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. Looking at the wild card round, that Denver Broncos, they made it back to the dance for the first time in a long time. They get the Buffalo Bills for their trouble. FanDuel has Buffalo favored by 8.5. The over-under set at 47.5. Just go to FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. The New Orleans Pelicans welcome Zion Williamson back to the court on Tuesday.
Here with y'all on this Wednesday, day after the Pelicans lose to the Minnesota Timberwolves, 104-97. But look, the final score of that game does not matter because Zion Williamson made his return, and that is the most important thing. The second most important thing is he looked good in this game. Really, really good.
Miami Heat traveled west to face the Golden State Warriors in a potential meeting of Jimmy Butler's current and future teams.
David, this one was for the culture. Everything stacked against them. Less than 24 hours after a heartbreaking double overtime loss in Sacramento. And you know who you have to give the credit to? The kids. Nikola Jovic, Jaime Jaquez Jr. They were great in this one. They stepped up when the Heat needed them the most. And that performance, I think, should give Heat fans confidence in the building blocks for the post-Jimmy Butler era. What about you?
Yeah, I agree. I was watching a game and there was a string there, I think in the second quarter. And it's like, you know what? The kids are all right. They're going to be okay. I thought that it was an impressive showing from them. There was a combination of players that just contributed at a high level.
And in college basketball, Kentucky played its first true conference road game of the season at Georgia.
Kentucky basketball loses to Georgia by 13 on the road. 82-69 is the final score. And ladies and gentlemen, if you look like me, Stevie Wonder in an officiating uniform, you could have officiated this game. It was one of the worst officiating performances that I have seen in my entire life. the calls that were simultaneously missed and the calls that were simultaneously made were so egregious at halftime. I immediately ran down to the store to get myself a pair of cheap sunglasses so that I could pull this bit off, to be honest with you. Guys, this was absolutely disgusting. Georgia, coming into this game, we knew they're a physical team. They have a lot of big men that are super talented that can dominate down low, grabbing boards. They dominate in the paint in terms of efficiency, shooting the basketball. Santos Cyril is a really, really good player. Asa Newell, 5-star freshman. They've got really good guys down low. The officiating crew allowed them to play however they wished. Santos Cyril was able to do literally whatever he wanted in the paint and outside the arc when he was guarding Brandon Garrison.
The Chicago Bears are one of, well, a quarter of the league currently looking for a new head coach in 2025. They have Caleb Williams. They've got some defensive talent. They've got some young offensive talent to offer. What's the structure going to look like? We don't really know. Let's not talk about it for the moment. Lauren Cox from Locked On Bears. He's always talking about it on his show. We know he's going to give us the latest on everything there. Lauren, the candidates, the interviews, they're trickling in here with Chicago. What do they tell us so far about what the Bears are trying to get with their replacement for Matt Eberflus?
It's been more of a flood than a trickle at this point. I think they're up to 13 officially reported interview requests, plus there's a couple others that they're expected to interview with. But clearly the Bears want to cast a wide net here and get a wide variety of perspectives. It's a lot of guys from a lot of different backgrounds. It's not 4 Kyle Shanahan tree coaches or 4 Sean McVay coaches, but a lot of guys that have a lot of different backgrounds on offense, backgrounds in leadership, backgrounds in college football. I think they just really want to get a broad sense of let's bring some new ideas in from outside the organization, because the stuff they've been hearing inside the walls of Hallis Hall hasn't been great for the last few years.
Let's focus in here on what I think is the number one candidate, at least for the moment, in the hearts and minds of Bears fans, and that's Lions offensive coordinator Ben Johnson. Johnson said earlier this year that if he's going to take a head coaching job, he wants the same sort of alignment with the GM, with ownership that they have in Detroit. Understanding that Caleb Williams is an appealing young player to deal with. There's some potential cap flexibility coming down here. Do you see that alignment in Chicago? Is that the kind of thing that Ben Johnson might be looking for?
Well, the Bears like to play a semantics game with the word alignment, and that's where we're kind of on answering this, because the Bears have been very clear of what the leadership structure is. Head coach reports to GM, GM reports to team president reports to chairman and ownership, essentially, and that they're not going to budge on that, where the head coach is going to report to the owner or whatever directly. But alignment in terms of contract structures, as far as Ryan Poles nearing the end of his contract as general manager, head coach coming in, getting a brand new deal, the Bears say, oh, well, that's not a big deal. Don't worry about that. No big deal. Coach candidates don't really care that much about that stuff. That'll all work itself out in the future. And Ben Johnson is telling you pretty directly, it sounds like he wants those things lined up. And maybe if they hired a Ben Johnson, they would line them up for him. But as of now, they're not being very clear on that.
And you're not just making things up when you're speculating on something like that. No. We heard from ownership that was not something that they were particularly worried about, right? This is something we're hearing from the mouths of the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, George McCaskey, the chairman of the board, said that's not something that's ever come up in interviews. And when Kevin Warren was asked directly, are you tied to Ryan Poles long term? He said, well, long term can mean a lot of different things. 1 year is a long time. So, we're still working through lots of stuff, very much like politicians running the show here that aren't giving you straight answers on what would think you'd want organizational clarity and everyone on the same message. We're getting some different things.
Yeah. The Bears, from a Packers standpoint, it's good that they're always going to be the Bears, and I appreciate that about them. It's a good branding opportunity for them. They're just always on brand as the Bears. Okay, understanding that Ben Johnson is that guy that everyone wants. He's not just for the Bears. Everyone currently with an opening, if they could wave a magic wand, would love to have someone like Ben Johnson. As you said, let's cast a wider net here. Who are some other names that you think could make sense for the Chicago Bears and would have interest in a job like that? Not trading for Kyle Shanahan, which is a thing that briefly Bears Twitter had a dalliance with.
Yeah, I mean, that's still any sort of like trading for people are still on Kevin O'Connell too. Like that's obviously not going to be a realistic thing for the Bears. I think it's one of the two Lions coordinators, Aaron Glenn or Ben Johnson. You throw in Brian Flores is going to be high on that list. Mike Vrabel is going to be high on the list. And then the likes of Joe Brady or Todd Monken. I will say it's worth noting that through 2 days now, the Bears have not put interview requests in for Cliff Kingsbury or Liam Cohen. And those were two guys they interviewed for their offensive coordinator job last year and declined. So maybe they saw enough and said, we didn't like you to be offensive coordinator, so we're not going to bring you back 12 months later and interview you for head coach when we didn't like you 12 months ago. I could see those guys being off the board entirely.
That is potentially interesting, right? Like Liam Cohen, I think, is going to be a hot name on this cycle. Cliff Kingsbury has been someone connected because of the Caleb Williams connection here. Okay, let's look into our crystal balls now, Lauren. Who do you think in 3, 4, 5 weeks, whenever this decision gets made, will ultimately get the Chicago Bears job?
The 3, 4, 5 weeks thing is interesting because a lot of those coaches we talked about are in the playoffs, and you can't hire them until they're done in the.
We got to fix the system. It's a bad system, but that's a different show for a different day.
Yeah. So Ben Johnson, I think, is pretty clearly priority number one for the organization and for the Bears here. I think that's going to be at the top of the list, and everything else is going to feel a little bit like settling for second place. But I do think the Bears aren't married to it. They don't think it has to be an offensive coach necessarily. They're confident enough in saying the right coach, the right leader. They'll figure out the offensive thing on the side. It's about having the full gamut of traits, which includes a plan for the quarterback. But you don't have to be the offensive coordinator to have a good quarterback plan.
You can stay up to date on the Chicago Bears by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Bears on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Coming up, the Titans are ridiculous. I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, comedy, theater. The atmosphere that you can get at those moments. A great comedy show, great, not even sports. I love sports, but I also love a great concert. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Curation make it easier to save on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more near you. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code Locked On for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. The Tennessee Titans fired Ran Carthon and installed Chad Brinker at the head of the front office. As Locked On Titans host Tyler Rowland points out, even if this move works out, the process shows just how embarrassing things have gotten for the Titans.
The process to get here was terrible. This is like having braces for the Tennessee Titans. Yeah, by the time that you're done with braces, you got perfectly straight teeth, but God, having braces for 2.5 years was miserable. That's what this was. That's what this was. And it's what it will be. And no matter what happens, even if things turn out roses for the Tennessee Titans because of this decision, the Titans will have a stain on their legacy and a stain on their reputation for how this last 2 years were. And I'm not just talking about firing Ran Carthon. I'm talking about firing Mike Vrabel as well, which the Titans were a laughing stock for firing Mike Vrabel. And now they're a laughing stock again for this organizational dysfunction. So the entire process of John Robinson trading A.J. Brown, to John Robinson getting fired midseason, to Mike Vrabel getting fired the next season, to Ran Carthon getting fired the next season, and then installing Chad Brinker, the entire process of that is about as messy as it could possibly get. For me, what it reminds me of is a breakup when you work at a restaurant. You guys ever worked at a restaurant before? I've worked at a ton of restaurants, fast food, sit down. I've worked at a ton of restaurants. I had to get a job really, really early in life. You know what I mean? And worked through college. And I know that a lot of you guys out there have worked in a restaurant before. You know how it is at a restaurant when the cook is dating one of the servers and then they have a fight? And now you're in the kitchen of the restaurant during the rush hour, and they're screaming at each other at the top of their lungs. And instead of cooking the steaks and the burgers like the cook is supposed to do, he gets mad and he walks out and he starts smoking a cigarette. Now you got people sitting at the table that the server is supposed to be giving the drinks to, and she's not around because she's out back screaming at the top of her lungs, scaring away the customers. That's what the Titans look like right now during this process.
Let's game something out. Let's say the 49ers had traded Trey Lance to the Kansas City Chiefs. And then in week 2, week 3, the Kansas City Chiefs had to sit Patrick Mahomes, and they brought in Trey Lance. And Trey Lance and the Chiefs beat the brakes off the 49ers. It would lead every show. It would certainly lead this show. It would be a huge deal that had happened. Well, in week 3 of this NFL season, so just 2-3 months ago, the Packers, after having traded a 7th round pick for Malik Willis, a quarterback that was going to be quarterback 3 on that depth chart, and he goes into Tennessee with the Packers, and they thump the Tennessee Titans with Will Levis, their preferred starter quarterback, a guy that they had used a top 50 pick on in the draft, who they had moved on from Malik Willis so they could play. Guys, of Malik Willis, Mason Rudolph, and Will Levis this year, Malik Willis looked like by far the best quarterback. This should be a huge story, except no one cares about the Titans. They're a huge mess, and no one cares. And finally, Lamar Jackson has figured out the method behind the madness of his inconsistent playoff resume. I'm just too excited, Jackson said. This time he's facing the Ravens' arch rivals, and the Steelers seem like they're pretty beatable, although Jackson has had some issues with Pittsburgh in the past. There's been turnover problems in the postseason. The Steelers have excelled at forcing them. FanDuel has a generous point spread in favor of Baltimore. Might be enticing to throw a little money on the Steelers, at least to cover. If you're catching this episode after hearing your favorite Locked On show, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast so you never miss an episode. Also, if you're a new subscriber to Locked On Sports Today, we're here for you with the biggest stories in sports every day. Coming up on the next Locked On Sports Today, which wildcard team has the best shot at pulling off an upset? I have an idea. So at least until tomorrow, stay locked on sports today.
Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
Go to our video on demand. Click on sports at the top of your screen. There, you'll find past episodes of Locked On Sports Today, plus other Locked On shows on demand.